medical bay smelled of antiseptic and desperation when Zarya first collapsed through its doors on the human station, orbiting Proxima 7. She had dragged herself 3 corridors with her failing legs burning in agony, and her pride shattered into 1,000 pieces because her own people had left her behind when the infection spread. The Valtorians were a proud warrior race known throughout the galaxy for their strength and their intolerance for weakness, and Zarya had been a decorated officer until the day a combat wound turned septic and her legs began to fail. Her commanding officer had looked at her with disgust when she could no longer stand at attention, and within hours she was declared defective and abandoned at the nearest neutral station, which happened to be run by humans. The creatures her people dismissed as soft and weak. Danny Brooks was finishing his shift when the doors hissed open and a tall, blue-skinned woman crashed onto the medical bay floor. He dropped his datapad and rushed over to find her semi-conscious and delirious with fever. Her legs were covered in dark veins spreading upward from deep wounds that had been poorly treated, and her breathing came in shallow gasps. Most species would have turned away a Valtorian because they had a reputation for being aggressive and ungrateful. But Danny only saw someone who needed help. He called for his assistant, Lucy Martinez, and together they lifted Zarya onto an examination table. The alien woman tried to fight them, at first hissing words in her language that Danny didn't understand but probably weren't polite. Her strength was nothing compared to what it should have been, and she soon fell unconscious. Danny worked through the night-running scans, and identifying the infection as a rare bacterial strain that attacked the nervous system in her legs. The Valtorian immune system was powerful, but this particular bacteria had evolved specifically to target their physiology. Without treatment, she would lose the ability to walk within days and die within weeks. He synthesized an antibiotic cocktail that would have been impossible for most field medics, but Danny had spent 5 years studying xenobiology because he believed every species deserved quality care. Lucy monitored Zarya's vital signs while Danny administered the first dose and began the delicate process of debriding the infected tissue. When Zarya woke 3 days later, she found herself in a private recovery room with her legs wrapped in regenerative bandages and a human sitting beside her bed reading from a tablet. Danny looked up when he heard her stir and smiled in that easy way humans had that always seemed so strange to other species. "Good morning," he said. "You've been out for a while." But the infection's responding well to treatment. Zarya tried to sit up and immediately regretted it as pain shot through her legs. Danny was beside her in an instant, helping her settle back against the pillows and adjusting them so she could sit upright comfortably. "Where is my ship?" she demanded, though her voice came out weaker than she intended. "Your people left you here 3 days ago," Danny said gently. "They said you were no longer fit for service." The words hit her like a physical blow. Even though she had known they were coming, Valtorian culture had no place for the weak or the damaged, and she had been both. She turned her face away so the human wouldn't see the emotion in her eyes, because crying was something warriors did not. Danny seemed to understand because he quietly left the room and returned a few minutes later with a tray of food. "It's nutritionally balanced for your species," he said, setting it on the rolling table beside her bed, and I made sure it was something that would taste decent. Zarya stared at the food, then at the human who had saved her life when her own people had thrown her away. "Why would you help me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Danny shrugged. "Because you needed help and because every life has value regardless of what species it belongs to or what condition it's in." Over the following weeks, Zarya learned that humans operated on principles that seemed alien to her. They cared for the sick even when recovery was uncertain, and they showed compassion even to those who had nothing to offer in return. Danny visited her every day, changing her bandages and adjusting her treatment, and slowly the infection began to recede. The dark veins faded and feeling returned to her legs in agonizing increments. Lucy brought her books and showed her human entertainment programs, and even the station commander, Amy Peterson, stopped by to check on her recovery. They treated her like a person, not like a burden or a defective piece of equipment. Physical therapy was brutal, and there were days when Zarya wanted to give up when the pain was too much and the progress too slow. But Danny was always there, encouraging her through every small victory and never showing disappointment. When she had setbacks, he taught her exercises to rebuild her strength and spent hours helping her relearn how to walk. The first time she stood on her own, she lasted only 30 seconds before collapsing. But Danny caught her, and his smile was so genuine that she felt something warm bloom in her chest, a feeling she hadn't experienced since before the injury. Months passed and Zaria's legs grew stronger until she could walk the corridors of the station without assistance. Her people would have said she was still defective because she would never again have the speed and agility she once possessed. But the humans saw her differently. Amy offered her a position on the station working in security, and Zarya accepted because she had nowhere else to go. She discovered that humans valued different kinds of strength, and that being a warrior meant more than just physical prowess. Danny continued to monitor her recovery even after she was medically cleared because he said he wanted to make sure she maintained her progress. Zarya suspected he just enjoyed her company, and if she was honest with herself, she enjoyed his too. They began spending time together outside of medical appointments. He showed her the observation deck where they could watch ships coming and going and shared stories about Earth and its bewildering diversity. She told him about Valtoria and its rigid hierarchies, and slowly began to understand how limited her worldview had been. One evening, as they sat watching a distant nebula paint the darkness in shades of purple and gold, Danny asked her what she planned to do now that she was recovered. Zarya had been thinking about that question for weeks. "I was rejected by my people because I was broken," she said. "But you showed me that being broken is just a temporary condition if someone cares enough to help you heal." She turned to look at him and for the first time in her life felt vulnerable in a way that had nothing to do with physical weakness. "You saved my life when you had no reason to, and you gave me something more valuable than medical treatment." Danny raised an eyebrow in question. "You gave me a reason to want to live," she said, "and showed me that value isn't determined by perfection." The human smiled and reached over to take her hand. His touch was warm and gentle, and Zarya realized that she had fallen not just into his arms that first desperate night, but into a future she had never imagined possible. Over time, her relationship with Danny deepened into something that transcended species and cultural differences. The other Valtorians she encountered looked at her with contempt when they learned she was living among humans, but Zarya no longer cared what they thought. She had found a home among people who measured worth by character rather than physical capability. Lucy became her closest friend, and Amy became a mentor, teaching her about human leadership styles that emphasized cooperation over domination. The station crew accepted her fully, and she discovered talents she never knew she had because her old culture had valued only martial skill. She excelled at conflict resolution and became known for her ability to mediate disputes between different species. Her injury had forced her to develop patience and empathy, and these qualities made her invaluable in her new role. Danny eventually admitted that he had fallen for her months ago, but had been afraid to say anything, because he wasn't sure if Valtorians experienced romantic feelings the same way humans did. Zarya laughed and told him that emotions were universal even if her people had been taught to suppress them. They built a life together on the station, and Zarya slowly let go of the shame that had haunted her since her injury. Her legs would always carry the scars of what she had endured, but those scars had become part of her story. A reminder that the worst moments of life could lead to the best chapters if you were brave enough to keep turning pages. Years later, when a young Valtorian soldier was abandoned at the station with injuries similar to what Zarya had suffered, she was the first to greet him. She helped him to the medical bay where Danny examined him and began treatment, and she sat with him during his darkest hours. She told him that being rejected didn't mean being worthless, and that sometimes the greatest strength came from accepting help and allowing yourself to heal. The young soldier looked at her with the same desperation she had once felt and asked if there was really hope for someone like him. Zarya smiled and gestured to her legs that carried her confidently through life despite their imperfections. "I was where you are now," she said, rejected and certain that my life was over. "But I fell into the arms of someone who saw value in me when I couldn't see it in myself." She glanced at Danny, who was preparing an injection with the same careful precision he had shown when treating her. "The humans have a saying," she continued, "that the best way out is always through, and sometimes the only way to discover who you really are is to lose everything you thought defined you." The young soldier began his recovery, and Zarya made sure he was never a